I need to share two experiences that happened during a camping trip when I was about 15. At the time, I brushed both incidents off as awkward or weird, but looking back now, I realize how dangerous those situations actually were. This happened during late July, about 6 summers ago. My family has this tradition where we go camping multiple times each season, sometimes planning months ahead, other times just picking a spot last minute when we get the itch to be outdoors. That particular summer, we decided on a whim to spend a week at Pinewood Campground, a place we'd never been to before, located roughly 90 minutes from our house. The drive there was beautiful, winding through dense forest roads that seemed to go on forever. When we finally pulled into the campground entrance, we were immediately struck by how deserted it was. I'm talking maybe 3 or 4 other campers in the entire place, which could easily hold 50 families. We snagged this incredible spot right on the edge of a ridge that looked out over this massive forested valley. The view was breathtaking, and my younger sister Maya and I were thrilled about having the run of the place. Our parents seemed equally pleased with the seclusion. My dad kept commenting on how peaceful it was, how nice to get away from crowds. My mom set up our campsite with her usual efficiency, organizing our 2 tents, the cooking area, and our supplies. Everything felt perfect. Isolated, yes, but in that good way, where you feel like you're really experiencing nature. The first incident happened on our 3rd day there. It was early afternoon, probably around 2 o'clock, and I'd been hiking with Maya all morning. I was sweaty and covered in dust from the trails, so I grabbed my shower supplies and headed to the women's restroom facility near our site. This particular bathroom was one of those typical campground structures, cinder block walls painted beige, concrete floors with drains, fluorescent lights that hummed constantly. It had 3 toilet stalls, 2 sinks, and a single shower stall in the back corner. Every other time I'd been in there, it had been completely empty. The whole campground was so vacant that I'd gotten used to having the facilities entirely to myself. I went into the shower, hung my towel and clean clothes on the hook outside the curtain, and took a quick shower. The water was lukewarm at best, which was normal for campground showers. When I finished and stepped out, wrapping my towel around myself, I nearly jumped out of my skin. There was a woman standing right there, maybe 3 feet from the shower entrance. She was older, probably in her 70s, with white hair and a floral dress that looked oddly formal for a campground. She smiled at me, this big warm smile, and said hello in a friendly voice. I returned the greeting, trying to shake off the startled feeling. She immediately started chatting, asking how long we were staying, if this was our first time at Pinewood, whether we were enjoying ourselves. Her manner was grandmotherly, completely non-threatening, so I answered politely while gathering my dirty clothes. I told her we were having a wonderful time, that the views were incredible. I moved over to the sink area to brush out my wet hair, and she slowly made her way toward the shower, walking with a slight shuffle. When I was focused on working through the tangles in my hair, when she called out to me, "Sweetie, could you help me for just a moment?" I turned around, and she was gesturing me over to the shower entrance. I walked closer, assuming she needed help with something simple. She pointed at the shower controls and asked how to turn the water on. I explained that it was motion activated, that she just needed to wave her hand in front of the sensor near the shower head. As I was demonstrating with my hand, I realized she'd already started removing her dress. She was standing right there, beginning to undress, completely unbothered by my presence. I quickly stepped back, embarrassed, and returned to the mirror. I heard her thank me, and then the water started running. I continued brushing my hair, planning to leave as soon as I finished, but then I noticed something in the mirror's reflection that made me pause. She hadn't closed the shower curtain. The water was running, steam was starting to build, and the curtain was pushed completely to the side, leaving the entire shower area visible. I kept my eyes firmly on my own reflection, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. "Excuse me, dear," she called out again over the sound of the water. I didn't move closer this time. "Yes," I called back. "I seem to have forgotten my soap. Would you happen to have any extra I could borrow?" Something about the whole situation was making my skin crawl now, though I couldn't articulate why. "Sorry, I don't have any extra," I said quickly. "I actually need to get going." I grabbed my things and left immediately, not looking back. As I walked quickly down the path toward our campsite, I started laughing nervously. The whole thing seemed absurd. just an eccentric old lady who didn't care about privacy. When I got back, I found Maya sitting by the fire and told her about the weird encounter, playing it up for laughs. Maya thought it was hilarious and insisted we go back to see if the woman was still there. I know that sounds strange, but we were young and thought it was just a funny, awkward situation. We walked back to the bathroom less than 5 minutes later, but it was completely empty. No sign of the woman at all. The shower wasn't even wet anymore, which seemed impossible given how recently I left. The second incident happened 2 days later and was significantly more disturbing. Maya and I wanted to check out the playground we'd seen marked on the campground map. It was on the far side of the grounds, probably a 15-minute walk from our site. Our mom said we could go as long as we stayed together, and she mentioned that our dad was down by the lake doing some fishing, which was relatively close to the playground area. We set off in the late afternoon, maybe around 5 o'clock. The walk took us through the most heavily wooded section of the campground, along a narrow paved path that wound between empty campsites. The trees formed a canopy overhead, making everything dim and cool. It was pretty, but also eerie because of how abandoned everything felt. We didn't see a single other person the entire walk. When we finally reached the playground, we found a ranger vehicle parked directly in front of the entrance, blocking the path, wherein it was one of those official Park Service trucks, green with the Pinewood logo on the side. 2 rangers stood beside the vehicle, a man and a woman, both appearing to be in their late 20s or early 30s. They were wearing the standard ranger uniforms, khaki shirts and dark pants, badges visible. The woman noticed us approaching and immediately smiled. "Oh, perfect timing," she called out. "We could really use your help." Maya and I stopped. Chua and the woman explained that they'd somehow lost the keys to their vehicle. She said they'd been searching for 20 minutes, but couldn't find them anywhere. "We really need some sharp young eyes," she said, her smile widening. "Would you girls mind helping us look?" I didn't hesitate. They were rangers, authority figures, people whose job was to help campers. Of course we'd help them. "Sure, no problem," I said. The male ranger nodded appreciatively but didn't say anything, and he just watched us with this neutral expression. The woman directed us to search around the vehicle, pointing out different areas. We walked around the truck, scanning the ground, checking near the tires. After a minute, the woman said, "You know, I might have dropped them inside. Could you girls check the seats? The doors are unlocked." Something about that request made me pause. Opening their vehicle, reaching inside, felt like crossing a boundary. On for several minutes, finding nothing. For several minutes, finding nothing. I was starting to feel uncomfortable, though I couldn't explain why. The male ranger had moved closer, standing near the back of the truck, still silent. The woman kept encouraging us, asking us to check under the seats, in the door pockets. Finally, I straightened up and said, "I'm sorry. We're not finding anything. We should probably get going." The woman's smile faltered immediately. Both rangers' expressions changed, becoming flat and cold. But the woman recovered quickly and said, "Oh, of course. Thanks for trying." Maya and I walked past them toward the playground, and as soon as we were out of earshot, Maya grabbed my arm and whispered, "That was really weird." "They just needed help," I said, but even as I said it, I felt uncertain. We played on the swings for maybe 20 minutes before our dad showed up, tackle box in hand. As we were talking to him, I noticed the female ranger walking along a path about 30 yards away. I called out, asking if she'd found her keys. She turned, seemed startled to see my dad standing there with us, and called back, "Oh yes, found them." But her voice was strained, and she immediately turned and walked quickly in the opposite direction. That evening, back at our campsite, Maya told our parents about the ranger encounter while we were roasting marshmallows. My mom's face went serious immediately. "You didn't get inside the vehicle, did you?" she asked. We explained that we'd just leaned in through the open doors to look. My mom exchanged a glance with my dad, and then she said something that made my blood run cold. Real rangers wouldn't ask children for help with something like that, and they'd have spare keys. That's standard protocol. The implication hit me like a punch to the stomach. Those might not have been real rangers at all, or if they were, they had no legitimate reason to ask 2 young girls to search their vehicle. My dad immediately went to the camp office to report the incident, but the manager said all their rangers had been accounted for that day, and none had reported lost keys. We left Pinewood Campground the next morning, cutting our trip short. I've thought about both of those encounters countless times over the years. The woman in the bathroom, showering with the door open, trying to keep me there. The fake rangers, getting us to lean into their vehicle, their expressions when we tried to leave. I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed longer in that bathroom, or if my dad hadn't shown up at the playground when he did. I don't want to know. So to the woman in the shower and the fake rangers at Pinewood Campground, let's not meet again. What I'm about to share with you happened during my first season as a ranger at Pinecrest Valley Campground. I've tried to piece together everything I witnessed, though some details have faded over the years. I know this account won't do justice to what that family went through, but I need to write it down before I forget completely. This is in memory of little Marcus, and I hope his story reaches someone who needs to hear it. The Henderson family arrived at Pinecrest on a Thursday afternoon in late June. I was manning the check-in station when their silver Honda Pilot pulled up with an oversized cargo pod strapped to the roof. The thing was shaped so strangely that I remember thinking it looked like a giant kidney bean. The father, David, struggled with the straps for a good few minutes, while his two sons watched from the back seat, clearly amused. I processed their reservation for Site 47, seeing one of our more secluded spots near the back of the campground. The mother, Jennifer, asked about restroom locations, while keeping their small terrier mix on a tight leash. The dog's name was Pepper, according to the tags jingling on her collar. The older boy looked about 11 or 12, and the younger one couldn't have been more than 7. They seemed like a typical family looking forward to a weekend in nature. I gave them the standard speech about keeping food secured, while I'm respecting quiet hours and staying on marked trails after dark. David nodded along, thanking me before driving toward their site. I didn't think much of it at the time. We got dozens of families every week during summer season. The next morning, I was doing my usual rounds when I spotted the two boys near the old maintenance shed on the eastern edge of the property. That building had been abandoned for years, and we'd been meaning to tear it down, but never got around to it. The older boy was leading the younger one away from it, both of them calling for their dog. I drove over and asked if everything was all right. The older boy, whose name I later learned was Tyler, explained that they'd been playing fetch with Pepper when she ran off and didn't come back. They'd been searching for over an hour. I told them I'd keep an eye out during my patrols and suggested they leave food at their campsite to lure her back. The younger boy, Marcus, looked devastated. No, his eyes were already red and puffy from crying. I spent the better part of that afternoon helping them search. We covered a good portion of the campground's 200 acres, calling for Pepper until our voices went hoarse. By evening, there was still no sign of her. I stopped by their site around dusk to check in. Jennifer was trying to stay positive, but David looked increasingly worried. The boys had set out a bowl of dog food mixed with lunch meat near their picnic table. That night, I was finishing paperwork in the ranger station when I got a call on the radio from our night patrol volunteer, Ed. He'd heard some commotion near Site 47 around 2 in the morning. Kids' voices, he said, and what sounded like someone running through the brush. I told him I'd check it out in the morning, figuring the boys were just restless about their missing dog. When I arrived at their site the next morning, David was making breakfast over the fire, while Jennifer sat reading, and I asked where the boys were, and David pointed to their tent, saying they were still asleep after a long night. But when Jennifer went to wake them for breakfast, she came back out holding Marcus's sneakers, her face pale. The tent was empty. Tyler was gone too. We searched for 3 hours before Tyler came stumbling back into camp, alone and terrified. He was scraped up, his clothes torn, and he wouldn't stop shaking. It took 20 minutes before he could even speak coherently. True, when he finally did, the story he told made my blood run cold. According to Tyler, he and Marcus had heard rustling outside their tent around midnight. Thinking it was Pepper, they'd grabbed a flashlight and gone to investigate. They'd followed the sounds deep into the woods, maybe half a mile from camp. That's when they found a pile of old clothes near a hollow tree, filthy and reeking. Tyler said the smell was so bad they almost turned back. Then the rustling started circling them, moving fast, too fast for a small dog. Tyler tried to get Marcus to run, but his brother insisted it was Pepper playing their usual game. That's when something threw a stick at them. Not dropped it, not carried it over. Threw it, hard enough to nearly hit Tyler in the head. Tyler grabbed Marcus and ran. but whatever was out there kept pace with them easily. He described seeing eyes reflecting in the flashlight beam, yellow, and positioned way too high off the ground to be a terrier. When they got close to camp, Tyler said he looked back and saw Marcus wasn't behind him anymore. He'd stopped running, turned around, and was walking back toward the woods. Tyler screamed for him, but Marcus just kept walking, like he was in a trance. By the time Tyler worked up the courage to follow, his brother had vanished completely. He'd searched until dawn before making his way back to camp. We called in the county sheriff and organized a full search party for the next 2 weeks. We had volunteers, deputies, and search and rescue teams combing every inch of Pinecrest Valley. David practically lived in those woods, refusing to give up. Jennifer stayed at the campsite, drinking heavily and barely eating. Tyler wouldn't leave their tent. On the 13th day, David and I were searching a ravine near the northern boundary when we found what was left of Marcus's stuffed animal. It had been a Superman doll, according to David. Now it was just scraps of blue and red fabric scattered across the ground, the yellow S emblem torn in half. We followed a trail of disturbed earth from there and heard movement in the distance. David took off running before I could stop him, convinced his son was out there. I followed, calling for him to wait, but he'd already disappeared into a thick stand of pines. When I caught up, he was standing perfectly still, staring at something on the ground. It was a freshly dug area, the soil dark and loose. David started digging with his bare hands before I could even process what we were looking at. I tried to pull him back, told him we needed to call the sheriff, but he wouldn't stop. Within minutes, his hands hit something solid. I won't describe in detail what we found. Just know that it was Marcus, and he hadn't been alone. Pepper's remains were there too, arranged in a way that seemed almost deliberate. But what haunts me most was the piece of paper clutched in Marcus's small hand. I had to pry his fingers open to get it. The note was written in crude letters, like a child's handwriting. Man's best friend. David collapsed. I called it in, and within an hour the area was swarming with police. They found evidence of someone living in that old maintenance shed, the one I'd seen the boys near on their first day. Whoever it was had been there for months, maybe longer. They found animal remains, more disturbing notes, and photographs of campground visitors taken from a distance. The thing that still keeps me up at night, though, is what the forensics team told us later. The soil analysis showed Marcus had been buried there within hours of his disappearance. Whoever took him had kept him alive for less than a day before bringing him back to the campground, to a spot less than 200 yards from where his family was sleeping, and buried him there while we were all searching miles away. They never caught whoever did it. The shed was abandoned by the time we searched it thoroughly. No fingerprints, no DNA evidence that led anywhere. Just those photographs and notes, and the knowledge that someone had been watching families at Pinecrest Valley for who knows how long. I quit at the end of that season. I couldn't walk those trails anymore without seeing Marcus's face, without hearing Tyler's description of those yellow eyes in the dark. The campground closed permanently the following spring. Last I heard, the county was selling the land to developers. Sometimes I still think about that cargo pod on the Henderson's car, the one shaped like a kidney bean. I think about how it sat on their vehicle for 2 weeks while David searched, how it was parked right there at their campsite the whole time. I think about the smell Tyler described near the pile of clothes, and I remember the identification tag that had been ripped off the pod's exterior. And I think about how sometimes the worst things aren't hiding deep in the woods. Sometimes they're right there in plain sight, waiting patiently for everyone to look the other way. This story requires some context to understand why things went the way they did. So here goes. For nearly 15 years, I worked seasonally as a campground ranger at Blackwood Canyon National Park in the high desert of Nevada. This particular incident happened during the spring of 2007. Cell service was basically non-existent out there. GPS units were still expensive luxuries, and the internet was something you accessed when you got back to civilization. The park roads back then were mostly primitive dirt and gravel. Water wasn't available anywhere inside the park boundaries, so visitors had to fill up at the entrance stations before heading in. During my tenure, the entrance booths were rarely staffed outside of peak summer months. People with annual passes would just drive right through without anyone checking. That season, there was major infrastructure work happening throughout the park. The Park Service had contracted a crew to upgrade several of the main access roads and install better signage around the more remote campgrounds. It was controversial among the regular visitors who preferred the park wild and undeveloped. I was stationed at Copper Ridge Campground, one of the larger sites in the northern section. The construction crew had set up their base camp about 4 sites down from the ranger station where I was staying. They kept to themselves mostly, working long days and drinking beer around their fire pit at night. One of my favorite spots in that campground was Site 17. It had a natural rock shelter at the back of the site, almost like a shallow cave. During the brutal afternoon heat, that shaded alcove was the coolest place around. When the occasional spring storm rolled through before dawn, it provided decent shelter from rain or even the rare snowfall we'd get at that elevation. The high desert attracts unusual people. When some are looking to disconnect from modern life, others are running from something. The area had a dark history too. There were old mining camps scattered throughout the region where terrible things had happened. Every few years, hikers would stumble across human remains that turned out to be decades old, or sometimes disturbingly recent. Part of my job involved getting to know the campers, checking permits, making sure people were following regulations. I'd often share meals with visitors, swap stories around campfires, help people who got their vehicles stuck on the sandy back roads. Early that week, I met a guy named Marcus, who'd been camping in the park for almost a month. He was from somewhere back east, maybe Pennsylvania or Maryland. He'd somehow landed a job washing dishes at a diner in Millerton, the closest town to the western entrance. He claimed he was biking the 20-plus miles each way for his shifts, which seemed nearly impossible given the terrain and heat. But his mountain bike was always parked at his site. Marcus was passionate about environmental issues. He wasn't happy about the road improvements and new signage going up. He'd go on long rants about how they were making the park too accessible, ruining the wilderness character. I later discovered he'd been vandalizing some of the new signs, spray painting over them or knocking them down. I didn't approve of the vandalism, but I understood his frustration with the changes. There was also a woman camping at the dead end of the loop road who was clearly dealing with serious mental health issues. Her site looked like something from a fever dream. She constructed strange shrines using rocks and desert debris. Glass bottles hung from the few scraggly trees, clinking in the wind. Wire sculptures made from trash decorated the perimeter of her site. She had wild, matted black hair and wouldn't make eye contact. When she spoke, it was mostly incomprehensible muttering to herself. I kept my distance and made a note to check on her welfare periodically. Next to the disturbed woman's site was a beige Honda station wagon with plates from somewhere back east, maybe Maryland or Virginia. The vehicle was absolutely crammed with cardboard file boxes stacked to the ceiling. Someone was clearly living out of it, which wasn't unusual, but the car seemed completely wrong for the terrain. Even my Park Service truck struggled on some of the deeper sand sections. The owner of that Honda was a man whose name I've struggled to remember over the years. It started with a D, I think. Maybe Dennis, or possibly Brandon with a D nickname. I've tried searching for news articles about what I believe happened, but I've never found anything. This man, I'll call him Dennis, was deeply unsettling. He dressed in khakis and button-down shirts, completely out of place in a desert campground. His whole demeanor was wrong. I'd worked with enough troubled people in my ranger training to recognize dangerous energy, and this guy radiated it. His story was that he'd recently gone through a divorce and was taking time to find himself on a cross-country road trip. I didn't believe a word of it. Everything about him suggested someone running from something serious. He had this predatory quality, like he was constantly calculating. He showed up at my camp one evening with Marcus. I was cooking dinner for myself and my friend Sarah, who was visiting me for the week. Sarah was outgoing and friendly, worked as a theater director back in Colorado. She loved meeting new people and hearing their stories. Dennis deflected every question we asked him, turning the conversation back to us. Sarah ate up the attention, telling him all about her work, where she lived, what her plans were after leaving the park. I sat there increasingly anxious, trying to memorize every detail about Dennis, his height, his vehicle, his license plate number. After that night, Sarah and I established a code word for when one of us felt unsafe. Dennis was fixated on Sarah in a way that made my skin crawl. She was oblivious, enjoying the conversation. I could barely eat. When he finally left, we'd already invited both him and Marcus to join us for dinner the following night. The next day, Marcus was nowhere to be seen. His campsite looked lived in. Mon walked over to Marcus's site to invite him. She came back alone. His camp was set up exactly as it had been that morning. Bike still there, no sign of him. Dennis arrived for dinner right on time. When we asked about Marcus, Dennis said Marcus had told him to meet him later that night out on Rattlesnake Trail, one of the deep desert jeep tracks that wound into the backcountry. I knew that trail. It was barely passable even for four-wheel drive vehicles. We'd helped pull a stuck jeep out of the sand there just a few days earlier. It was miles from the campground, deep into absolute wilderness. I agreed to drive us out there after we ate. Dennis kept steering every conversation back to Sarah, asking detailed questions about her life, her routines, her travel plans. Despite our earlier talk about his creepy behavior, she was still soaking up the attention. After dinner, the three of us got into my truck. I was driving, Sarah in the passenger seat, Dennis directly behind her in the back seat. Dennis had a dark backpack on his lap that he kept his hands on. Every instinct I had was screaming that there was a weapon in that bag. We drove for over an hour into increasingly remote terrain. The sun had set completely. No moon that night. Just stars and my headlights cutting through the darkness. We reached the location Dennis indicated. Nothing. No Marcus. No vehicle. No one. We were now 2+ hours from the nearest town, from any help, from any cell signal. Dennis said, "This is it. We need to get out and hike from here to find him." Every fiber of my being was telling me that if I left my truck, I was dead. I kept imagining Dennis pulling a gun from that backpack, putting it to Sarah's head, forcing me out into the desert. It was completely black out there, the kind of darkness that's almost tangible. I told Dennis we weren't getting out. He was welcome to, but I was driving back to the campground. Dennis was furious. His whole energy shifted to barely contained rage. I repeated that he could exit the vehicle. He didn't move. The drive back was silent and tense. I kept checking the rearview mirror, watching his hands on that backpack. Dennis was seething. I was terrified, but trying not to show it. Back at the campground, still no sign of Marcus. Dennis wanted to sit around my fire. I told him I was exhausted and going to bed. Sarah followed me into the ranger station. We whispered urgently about what had just happened. She finally admitted she'd felt certain Dennis was about to pull a gun from that backpack. We were on the same page now. We discussed driving to Millerton to report our suspicions to the sheriff. But what would we actually report? A guy gave us bad vibes and wanted us to hike in the dark? I was a woman in my 20s with visible tattoos and an alternative look. Sarah had bright dyed hair. We'd be reporting suspicions to a conservative law enforcement agency in a military town based on nothing concrete. We might not be taken seriously, or worse, might be detained ourselves for wasting their time. We talked about going to the construction crew for help, but approaching a group of drinking men in a remote location seemed like potentially trading one danger for another. We decided to sleep in my truck that night instead of the ranger station. I had a large hunting knife I kept in my gear. It wasn't much, but it was something. My truck had extremely dark window tint that was technically illegal in most states. I'd been pulled over for it countless times during cross-country drives. That night I was grateful for it. Neither of us slept much. Sarah had mentioned to Dennis the previous night that her next stop after leaving Blackwood was Cavern Lake National Park in New Mexico. Dennis had said he might head that direction too. When we emerged from the truck at dawn, Dennis was standing in my campsite. "Where were you two?" he asked. I checked the ranger station. My blood went cold. We told him we'd slept in the rock shelter at Site 17. We asked if he'd seen Marcus. He said no. We packed up Sarah's stuff as quickly as possible. Dennis told us he'd probably see us at Cavern Lake. We nodded non-committally. We'd already decided to head north to Mesa Cliffs instead. Before leaving, I walked over to Marcus's site one final time. Everything was still there. Tent, bike, gear. No Marcus. I asked the disturbed woman if she'd seen him. She said she hadn't seen him in several days, then went back to her muttering. We left Blackwood Canyon and drove east. And I genuinely believed Dennis killed Marcus and had planned to kill us too. I wrote down Dennis's full name and license plate number in my Ranger log. Over the years, I've searched online in every way I can think of, trying to find some record of what he was running from or what happened after. I found nothing. I hope whatever Dennis was fleeing eventually caught up with him. Trust your instincts. Always. They exist for a reason.